He is in there. So yes, Frank Lloyd Wright is in there. He's there. You couldn't ignore, nobody taking on this topic could ignore Wright. But so are Gustav Stickley and the architects Green and Green. And so are dozens of other American architects and designers associated with the arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 20th century. Many of these men and women are little known now, but they were prominent in their day. A lot of them also were well connected with each other. Showing these connections is one of the features of my book. And for the moment now, that's the Dana House in Springfield. A little bit of Wright that to give you the idea. Yes. Oftentimes, audiences ask me why I decided to write about a certain topic. This book is the outgrowth of two other books that I have written on architects who are proponents of the arts and crafts movement. One book, which is on the screen right now, was about a Boston architect named Herbert Langford Warren. He founded the architecture program at Harvard in 1893. The date's pretty useful for those of us who are well engaged or involved with the arts and crafts movement. 1893. 4 years later, 1897, he became a founder of the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston. And he served as president of that society between 1903 until his death in 1917. So he's really just totally tied to the movement. He's an advocate for it as president of the Society of Arts and Crafts, but also he was still teaching at Harvard, so he had a big platform. The second book that I published on the arts and crafts movement took me beyond Warren and into the various architects, and there were quite a few. I focused on a dozen of them who were involved in the Society of Arts and Crafts who lived in New England. And so I was expanding my view. Finally, I decided to take, to me, it was a big leap, a huge leap, and to write about the American architects, craft workers, and their clients whose buildings reflect arts and crafts ideas throughout the United States. Now, before I dive in, I do think it's helpful to just ask, what is the arts and crafts movement? And we could all talk for a long time about that, I have no doubt. But to keep it short, but to make sure I say something about it, I want to say that my answer would be, it's about a set of values that emerged in mid-19th century England. These ideas were advanced by John Ruskin, whom you see on the left, and William Morris. Both of these men were distressed by the rise of industry, and they were seeing the harms of the factory system. They were appalled by the suffering of laborers in the mills, and they were also dismayed about cheap mass-produced goods that were coming out of this factory system. Both of them revered the natural world. The countryside was being desecrated, and they were horrified. They believed that life in pre-industrial times was considerably better. I have to, sometimes I do this, make an aside and say, I'm not sure it really was better, but they believed it was better. So that's the main point here. And they also were interested in looking at pre-industrial times. They were also not just interested, they were also of the belief that England's Middle Ages was the native, when native ideas about art and design really were formulated. They believed that during the Middle Ages, routine work was more satisfying. And they believed that even ordinary objects during that period were more beautiful. So were buildings, including medieval architecture. Morris became interested in collaborative relationships that existed among medieval builders, artisans, and artists. Morris also became passionate about the preservation of England's historic landmarks, organizing the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings in 1877. At first, England's medieval survivors inspired the movement's leaders. And this is going way back here, of course, and very familiar to most of you. It's Red House in Bexley Heath, Kent, that was designed by Morris's friend, Philip Webb, 1859 to 61. It's irregular in its form. It's unassuming. It's not a pretentious building at all. And in this concept of it being medieval, unassuming, friendly even, warm, it's very different from the classical designs of in England, which is where Morris, of course, is looking, that's his world. And the classical architecture would have been Georgian and later Greek Revival architecture. Morris and his friends also sought to revive the medieval practice of collaboration, the ideal in which an architect, artisans, and artists work together. At Red House, the friends collaborated on enhancing it with stained glass, murals, and furniture. So by the late 1880s, many English architects were involved with arts and crafts organizations. Their designs were diverse, but they reflected arts and crafts values. These buildings reflected an appreciation, these English arts and crafts buildings did reflect an appreciation of England's medieval examples. Their buildings were based on vernacular styles, and they used local materials. These buildings were irregular in their massing, and back to that kind of moral judgment, they were simple and unpretentious. And they were, these many English architects too, were involved with artisans and artists. So these arts and crafts tenets spread quickly to the United States. Many Americans were attracted to the movement, including architects. So before I started writing my manuscript for the book, I asked myself, how would I select the architects and buildings for a book? I had to be very picky for one book. So to guide me, I decided to focus on architects and craft workers who were involved in arts and crafts organizations. Also, I was going to include buildings that contributed to the movement, such as pottery buildings or headquarters of arts and crafts societies. And I was interested in writers, editors, and educators who promoted arts and crafts values. So these American advocates responded to their region's distinctive cultures and landscapes. For this reason, I organized my book's chapters by region. And what you're seeing here on the screen is the Pewabic pottery. So there's a pottery building, and it's located in Detroit. The architect was William B. Scranton, and it dates from 1906 to 7. Here you can see that there's an English English history, English heritage does come into play in all parts of the United States. And this is just one example. I'll return to this idea in a few minutes. On the right, you're looking at John Gaw Meem's design for the University of New Mexico's library. And it was designed by Meem between 1936 and built by 1938.
Maureen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. A couple of people have asked in the chat if you could speak up a little bit. I wonder if moving a bit closer to the microphone might help.
Let me try and closer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm at pretty high. Does that help?
I think that sounds good. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. My first chapter addresses New England. People here maintained especially close connections to England. In 1897, Boston architects, craft workers, and supporters founded a Society of Arts and Crafts. Each of these buildings that you see on the screen was designed by an architect who served as the society's president. In other words, they're directly involved with the arts and crafts movement, and in Boston as their president of the entire organization. On the left, what you're seeing is Herbert Langford Warren's chapel for a Swedenborgian community. And it dates from 1899 to 1901. It's right next to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And if you know the Harvard campus at all and where the GS building is, you'll recognize that chapel. On the right is a house designed by R. Clipston Sturgis. He designed this house for a man named John C. Schwab, who was a professor at Yale. So the Schwab House is located in New Haven, and it dates from 1895 to 96. Not coincidentally, both architects trained in England. They designed buildings based on English medieval examples. The chapel that Warren designed on the left is an example of the English parish church, and he knew those churches very well. He did grow up in England. He came here after he was grown. And on the right, the inspiration clearly for Sturgis's house is the real English medieval houses. It's important to note that these arts and crafts leaders shared the view that Americans are English by heritage. So these people are English by heritage, but it was also their view that Americans are English by heritage, wherever you came from. And we're talking about 1890s when there are huge numbers of people coming in, especially from Southern Italy, Eastern Europe. They're coming in from around the world. No matter, once you are here, your heritage, you embrace your heritage, which is English. The architects did work very closely with artisans, especially as an example on the right. That one I know is it's a detail, the sculpture on the church we just saw, the chapel we saw, and this was one of Warren's close colleagues that he turned to for carved stone. The work is by Hugh Cairns, a founder, in fact, of the Society of Arts and Crafts Boston, and the Schwab House. Sturgis was working with wood carvers and glass workers. The region's architects also shared the view that the English held in valuing historic preservation. At Proctor Academy, there was a boarding school founded in New Hampshire that incorporated early 19th century buildings. One of these buildings was a stable that Warren and his business partner turned into a gymnasium for this boarding school. As you see, they did rebuild it, or as you can imagine, they rebuilt it. How the stable began is just a rectangular box with a gable roof on it and white clapboard on the outside. It was very plain. So what they did is they inserted large windows at either end of the building, of the old stable building, and they also added this huge amount of truss work to include hammer beam. Well, they included hammer beam trusses. So those would be like the truss work you would find in English medieval halls and churches. In this way, this modest gymnasium combines the New England architect's appreciation for ancient buildings, as well as English medieval architecture and historic preservation. So I don't know if I gave you the date. It was built in 1909. My next chapter takes the reader to New York State. Residents there were so actively engaged with the movement that I decided New York needed its own chapter. I begin in New York City. By the end of the 19th century, French Beaux architecture was ascendant, especially in New York City. The arts and crafts buildings, all the same, were being built in the city. Many of you may recognize St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Midtown Manhattan. It's the work of Cram, Goodhue, and Ferguson, and it dates from 1905 to 13. It was at this point, when this was being even planned, Ralph Adams Cram was working from their office in Boston. But Bertram Goodhue was by now in New York City. He was the architect for the chapel at West Point. And so he was already in New York. But the men had been together and were working still as a partnership. Both men were devoted members of Boston's Society of Arts and Crafts. And both Cram and Goodhue were well-known medievalists. At St. Thomas, they worked with Lee Laurie on the facade sculpture and a spectacular reredos, which you see here. But the architects weren't getting along at all. And finally, just at the time when the partners won the competition with a very English concept, Graham starts introducing French allusions. And Goodhue was not at all happy about it. So they actually were fighting back and forth with plans and elevations for what they wanted to see built. Finally, they did split apart, and Goodhue started his own practice in New York City. In upstate New York, many small arts and crafts communities and societies emerged, from Buffalo to Rochester to Syracuse to Woodstock in the Hudson Valley. The Roycroft community was established in East Aurora near Buffalo, and so it's going to serve as our one example of this. It was founded by Elbert Hubbard, who was very directly inspired by William Morris's Kelmscott Press. What Hubbard did was first to start the Roycroft Press, and he opened a print shop in East Aurora, New York. Again, it's near Buffalo. And it was doing so well that Hubbard decided to include furniture design and makers, and also people engaged in metalwork. So Roycroft grew into an arts community, but it was Hubbard's business. He designed buildings that were vaguely English and medieval in style. What you see here is called the chapel, and it's not a place for worship. It's a meeting place for the residents of the Roycroft community. And you'll see the meeting place, just meeting, like just place for meeting, is something that comes up in many of these arts and crafts communities. It has Gothic arches, yes, a few, and it also has a crenellated tower. It's very simple and picturesque. Under a north gable, which is blocked in the left-hand slide by tree branches, but in that north gable, north-facing gable, resident artist Jerome Connor added a north wind. It's in terracotta. So working with other artists, even on the buildings, that's something that we see pretty often. In the mid-Atlantic, several utopian communities were planned. Today, Gustav Stickley is best known for his furniture business. He also published the Craftsman magazine, in which the ideas of William Morris were promoted. Soon the magazine featured simple houses. The word simple gets used over and over, especially modest bungalows. In the New Jersey town of Parsippany Troy Hills, Stickley planned to build Craftsman Farms. It would be a model community for boys. So, but it was unfortunate. The building shown here was to serve as a clubhouse, and it dates from 1910 to 11. But it was already a time when Stickley could see problems ahead with his business. And the dream for this boys' farm just didn't happen and wasn't going to happen. So Stickley turned the building into a home for his family. It's, as you can see on the side, it's built of logs that were located on the property. Again, a natural or native material is being used. The building itself is rustic and simple, at one with nature. Unfortunately, Stickley went bankrupt and left New Jersey in 1915. Philadelphia architect William L. Price had more success in launching an arts and crafts influenced community. His ideas for arts and crafts communities were planned with the influence of Morris and England's C.R. Ashby. And they brought in both of these locations, they brought in craft workers and artists to work together. Price bought an abandoned mill village outside of Philadelphia that he called Rose Valley. And he moved his family there, attracting a wood carver and other people who would begin crafting furniture. They reused existing buildings. We've already been hearing about that, such as the Guild Hall on the left, dating from 1902. Originally, it was a water-powered mill, and he rebuilt it for the workers. Unfortunately, again, by 1906, Price couldn't meet the wages of the people working there, and he closed Rose Valley. In 1900, an artist friend of Price's bought farmland near Wilmington, Delaware. They named this place Arden, after the magical forest in Shakespeare's As You Like It. So it was the artist's friend, along with assistance from Price, that they established a village where residents would lease, not buy, the land for their own houses. Artists and craftspeople arrived. They built a red house where guilds could meet, and they called it Red House because of their familiarity with William Morris's Red House. In 1913, with some support, outside support, shall we say, Price designed the craft shop. The craft shop was where the craftspeople could show, display, and sell their works. It's English Tudor in style, as you see. It dates from 1913. Women also contributed to the arts and crafts movement. They worked as architects, designers, and clients. One of the South's most successful architects was Layla Ross Wilburn of Atlanta. She became known for plan books that she published. These plan books mainly focused on small houses. They were bungalows and craftsman type dwellings. They had shallow roofs, deep eaves, and exposed rafter tails. And she also emphasized that the plans would suit the Southern climate. Porches for living, porches for dining, for sleeping, and so on. But affluent clients did hire her, commissioned her to design large houses. And what you're seeing here, if you were wondering about my little bungalow mentioned there for her plan books, this is not it. This is a commission. It's called the Carr House. It's located in the Druid Hills area of Atlanta, and it was built in 1919. You can see that it retains a lot of craftsman features, such as the overhanging roof with the deep eaves, the rafter tails that are not especially visible in my slide here, but they're there. And you can see the porches. Chicago is where architects and arts and crafts sympathizers organized another arts and crafts society. Just months after Boston's, in the same year, 1897, the initial meeting of the Chicago Society took place at Hull House, a settlement house inspired by Toynbee Hall in London's East End. Among the founders of the Chicago Society was Frank Lloyd Wright. Reflecting an arts and crafts principle, he designed houses to respond to the locale. In their horizontality, they referred to the outstretched plains of the Midwest. And this idea of the horizontality, stretching out to embrace the land, became the basis for prairie school architecture. This is the Dana House, Susan Dana House, located in Springfield, Illinois. It dates from 1902 to 4, so it's at the front end of the prairie school movement. Wright collaborated closely with artists and craft workers, especially Richard Bach, who worked in Wright's Oak Park, Illinois, Oak Park studio. They conceived of this sculpture. They came up with the idea together. They worked together. They're in the studio together. And this sculpture was intended, and in fact was installed in the entrance of the Dana House. Many architects from Wright's studio would interpret Wright's ideas, including Marion Money. And this is a design that she picked up after Wright left the country. We're not going there, it's too long a story, but there were commissions that had come into the office that hadn't been started, and she did design this house located in Decatur, dating from 1910 to 11. Across the Midwest, prairie school buildings were erected. William Gray Purcell grew up in Oak Park. He worked for a few months in Chicago in Louis Sullivan's office, and then he settled in Minneapolis. He became editor also for the thinking too. I became editor of the Western Architect. He wasn't the founder of Western Architect. He didn't start it was a newspaper for architects, primarily for architects, a trade magazine. So he wasn't a founder, but the people, the architects in the Midwest were getting frustrated. They wanted somebody who was sympathetic to what they were doing and not putting in spending so much, giving so much attention to the architects from the East. So anyway, the owner brought in Purcell in 1911, and he promoted prairie school designs, which was the goal. His own house dates from 1913, and it's a version of prairie school architecture. It has flat roofs, it has stucco veneer, exposed wood, the bands of windows that you see in a lot of prairie school architecture, and of course these deep overhangs. The house also reflects Purcell's interest in working with artists and artisans. And for example, the art class that you're seeing on the screen was from a maker in Minneapolis. It's Mosaic Art Shops that supplied it. And then there are these, you can see them here, the side lights on either side of the front entrance. And they're custom made. There's a bit of Purcell in them. It's a little bit funny when you're humorous when you approach the door and you're waiting for the door to be answered. On both sides in stained glass are the words peekaboo. Inside, you'll see lighting by Robert Jarvie of Chicago and a sculpture by Richard Bach. When a Black congregation in Omaha planned their new church in 1921, they did not choose an English medieval style. Rather, they believed a prairie school design would best suit their identity as residents of the Midwest. St. John's African Methodist Episcopal Church in Omaha was designed by Frederick Stott, and it dates from 1921 and was not finished until 1947. St. John's has the pronounced horizontality, the strong geometric forms, and the cantilevers of the earlier designs that originated in Chicago. Architects in the Mountain States also were inspired by their natural settings, as may be seen in their rustic buildings. There was an attitude that in American society that was this desire to escape city life, and that too certainly would reflect what was going on in England. With development of the railroads, prosperous Americans could vacation in the country's remote places. New national parks allowed more and more people to enjoy nature. Old Faithful Inn is the slide that I'm showing you here. It's located in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. Many of you have probably been there. And it was the work of architect Robert C. Reamer and dates from 1903 to 4. It looks rustic, but it had plumbing, it had electricity, and it had steam heat. A Montana blacksmith named George Colpitts and his workshop supplied iron ornaments and objects for the inn. The clock is what I chose to show you. It's very large. You can even see it on the left-hand slide. Now, if you look at the right slide, and then you can locate it. So here's this enormous clock. Another thing that it was kind of funny. Again, these people had humor. Was this gigantic popcorn popper that I can't see it and have never seen it in the slide, but it's this huge popcorn popper that just was entertaining for the visitors at the inn. It also came out of the Colpitts workshop. Historic preservation became a cause for Americans living in the Southwest. And in this way, it was similar to the interest in preservation that arose in New England and earlier in England. Sympathetic Anglos were concerned about the mission churches that were decaying. They were washing away. They were made of adobe brick and covered in mud plaster that needed to be maintained. The buildings themselves were literally handmade. The bricks were made by hand with mud plaster or with mud, and then the plaster was applied by hand. So, and maybe to add a little bit more there, the buildings had to be plastered year after year, and this was done for a long time, and then it wasn't. Saving San Esteban del Rey was an early focus of the group, concerned group of Americans. And it was led, the idea of how to rebuild and preserve San Esteban del Rey. It was led by a volunteer architect, John Gaw-Meem, who was working with the Acamas and the Franciscans. It was truly collaborative. It wasn't top-down at all. They held similar attitudes about preservation to those of Morris and Webb, but the exterior of this building was an issue, and it had to be entirely recovered to survive. So you weren't in Morris's world, you didn't touch the buildings if you could avoid it. But here, the entire building would traditionally be recovered every year with new mud plaster. So when it was finally under this restoration project, or when the restoration project was going on, they were aware of how the maintenance that buildings such as this would require. And so they chose to use, they all agreed that they would use stone for the copings of the building and stone at the base of the building to minimize the amount of washing and damage to the building. Responding to the history of the Southwest, John Gaw-Meem went on to design buildings in a Spanish Pueblo revival style. He was hired for many projects at the University of New Mexico, a number of campus buildings, and it's a beautiful campus. Most notably, he designed the University Library. It's now called Zimmerman Library. The university is located in Albuquerque, and it was Meem's project between 1936 and 38. It has flat roofs and battered walls inspired by the Taos Indian Pueblo. It has a deep porch. You see the vigas that are projecting out of it, which this kind of porch is typical of Spanish colonial architecture. And then it was decorated inside, and that decoration survives. It's splendid with wood that was carved by Native Americans. It was structurally modern, though. It is built of steel and concrete. We're talking about the 1930s here. The arts and crafts love of nature took hold in the Pacific Northwest. These slides are from Paradise Inn at Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State. The architects were Heath and Gove, and it was built between 1916 and 1917. As at Old Faithful, the inns were rustic in design. Inns in general were rustic in design. They were rustic in a way, though, to welcome city people. They were informal, and they had large lobbies and dining rooms. And this was true of Paradise Inn. At Paradise Inn, even the furnishings were rustic. The person who produced most of the lobby furnishings, the bigger, more important ones, was a German-born carpenter named Hans Frenke. He crafted a 14-foot tall grandfather clock. It's still there. And he also applied wood to an upright piano, which people do play, but I can't vouch for the quality of the sound, but it's rustic. In California, several styles are apparent as architects and clients respond to the arts and crafts movement. In the Bay Area, regional materials, especially redwood shingles, were left unpainted. There is a concept floating of the simple home. Again, I could go into this in great depth, but we'll just say that the idea of the simple home became popular. And it then was even applied to a church, as you see here, the first Unitarian church in Berkeley, designed by Albert Schweinfurth and built between 1897 and 98. It was a clubhouse for women in the right bottom slide, the Saratoga Foothill Club. Saratoga is southwest of San Jose, and it was designed by Julia Morgan in 1915. In Southern California, a variety of styles is apparent as designers, architects respond to the region. This example is El Alisal, which is located outside of downtown LA. It's in the neighborhood of Highland Park. It also was built with local materials to fit the natural setting. It was constructed by its owner, Charles Fletcher Lummis. It was built over a long period between 1898 and 1910. Lummis grew up in Boston. He studied art at Harvard with the professor who's well known for probably one of the best known 19th century professors, Charles Eliot Norton. Norton, you may know, was a close friend of John Ruskin, and he was a friend of William Morris. In 1897, Norton was elected the first president of the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston. So Lummis shared Norton's interest in culture and craft. Lummis also championed Native American culture, founding the Southwest Museum of the American Indian. So he built his house, not surprisingly, with local stone and hand-adzed wood. And there's a small amount of metalwork too that was made in Los Angeles, but too many slides. I wanted to keep it short here. The brothers Charles and Henry Green designed houses to fit the natural setting in Pasadena. The Gamble House was to be the winter home for the Gamble family of Cincinnati. It's shingled and it hugs the land. It's sited to overlook the river valley or arroyo behind it. It's large, but it's unpretentious, and it's built like a giant bungalow. Inside, it's decorated with beautiful stained glass, tile, and carved wood. Both Greens had studied at MIT in Boston and trained with architects there. In fact, Charles Green worked in the office of Langford Warren, whose Swedenborgian chapel we saw a few minutes ago. So while these buildings are stylistically very different from each other, each was appropriate to its location. George Washington Smith became a successful architect around the area of Santa Barbara. He studied architecture with Langford Warren at Harvard, but he never finished. In fact, he went to Europe. He really wanted to be an artist, but eventually he came back to the United States, and he found, after building his own house, there were a lot of people who wanted him to design houses for them. And so he's the architect of Casa del Herrero, located in Montecito. It was built between 1922 and 1925. Here, Smith and the client embraced the cultural heritage of Southern California. They were referring to here the Spanish settlement in the Southwest. And I emphasize it's the Spanish settlements and Spanish history of the region that they are calling out, and they believe it's Spanish. They're not at this point interested in alluding to Mexico or Mexican architecture. It would happen, but not here. The house was built for George F. Stedman, a St. Louis industrialist, as a winter home. In 1927, when he retired, he traveled to Boston to study silversmithing with George C. Gebeline, a master craftsman with the Society of Arts and Crafts. Once back in Montecito, now year-round, Stedman spent his time working with silver. He was a serious craftsman in his senior years. Tudor houses were popular across the United States. They're everywhere. Many Americans coming from different ethnic backgrounds, not just Yankees, in New England accepted the notion that their heritage was English. The Rothman House, shown here, is a Tudor located in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. And it was created by, or the designer was the architect, Paul Williams. he was an African American. He was capable in many styles, and he often was asked to design Tudors, large and small. In England, the relationship between the arts and crafts movement and English architecture has long been understood. Here in the United States, arts and crafts architecture might bring to mind Frank Lloyd Wright, as I can confirm after my appointment with my doctor. That said, in the United States, many more architects embraced and promoted the movement. Although their buildings varied stylistically, they expressed arts and crafts values. The value placed on craftsmanship, the concept of the architect collaborating with artists and artisans, the view that a building should respond to a region's history or regional landscape, and the support for historic preservation. These two buildings might look quite different from each other. Well, they do. The Schwab House on the left, El Alisal on the right, from New Haven, Connecticut to Los Angeles. But both of them speak of the arts and crafts movement as it was interpreted across the United States at the turn of the 20th century.
This is one of those times when Zoom, I wish we could all hear, you could hear all the applause that we're all offering. And you know, we're all applauding in our very different places. Yes, there we go. Lots of lovely applauses coming across the screen.
Thank you, everyone. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Maureen. We have a few questions in the chat which we can go straight to. One question is, does your book include information about which buildings can be visited?
You know, I never did that. No, I guess, but there are a lot of them. So if you want to ask me, fine, or just go on the internet. But maybe many of you know the Gamble House is a house museum. Let's see. Oh, there were. Some people have asked me also how I chose the buildings, and I did have some. There was some favoritism on my part to buildings that I thought people could see. So that were, museums.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Margaret. The arts and crafts movement of the late 19th century in England had a strong political connection and ideals, mainly socialist. How many of the American architects, especially those working in the 1920s and 30s, were still advocating for those political values and had an activist bent? What an interesting question.
I love it. And I want to make sure I get to both because my mind was already answering. In Boston, there was discussion of it. First president of the Society of Arts and Crafts was Charles Eliot Norton. Second one was a man named Astor Carey. I can't remember his first name all of a sudden. But in doing that, Carey really wanted to embrace this socialist cause. And I should add, so did George Barton. He's another person I didn't bring in here, but I wrote about it for the William Morris Society, Liberty, Useful and Beautiful magazine. So George Barton too. So that did happen, but the majority of the members didn't want that. And so Carey was actually providing a lot of funds for a magazine for the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston. He pulled out, he went away. He didn't like the idea that this was going to be about design, craft, collaboration, but they were not going to embrace socialism. But Barton definitely had leanings in that direction. And the other thing you will see is the priority they did have. There's this part, say for sure, even the people in Boston who were not going to embrace socialism, and Langford Warren was the third president, and I've seen, writings, letters of his and so on, and he said, that does not belong in this organization. So no socialism is in his mind. but there were definitely interests in supporting and doing their designing buildings for types of buildings they considered important to society. So it could be hospitals, it could be homes for the elderly. It could be campus buildings of all types. I showed you just the roof, but at Proctor Academy, anything educational, school buildings. Our Clipston Sturgis became head of the school buildings committee for the Boston public schools. So there was definitely a sympathy and an interest in helping people, but not socialism. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, because in the question asked about the 1930s, by that time, there's the New Deal. And the beautiful carving that I described in the John Gaumeem's library building, all that was in the carvers were all Native American, but they were supported by New Deal funding. So there was a little bit of that, what you might call the socialistic concepts that came out of FDR.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
can I do one more? Because he
Of
did say
course.
one picture.
Yeah.
Although Rose Valley failed, the money just didn't work with the carving beautiful furniture, but the art and it still exists, and I've been there, and it still retains this common ownership, which in this day and age we might consider more like a condominium, but not quite. It's really the land goes to the trustees manage it, and it's the whole community owns the property with just the houses. You do own it, and they do sell. They buy and sell their houses, but the land belongs to the community. Another one of these, that's more socialistic.
Margaret, thanks you for that answer, as do we all. Um, and Dave Kopp has said he received your book as a Christmas present. Um, and he is curious to ask how you might distinguish between Gothic revival architecture and Gothic architecture that can be called arts and crafts. Is it strictly the fact that the architects are involved in arts and crafts societies? I ask this, Dave says, because Ruskin infamously called A.W.N. Pugin the smallest possible architect. Clearly, there are those who would see revival architecture as mere imitative attempts. I do not. But is there a way to distinguish or to label a Gothic revival church like St. Thomas as arts and crafts?
Well, it's good because the whole, and I won't say I'm the only one in this position. There are many people who have what to say, move toward this end point. When you visit these different, I'll start with house museums, but churches, they're telling you how they're influenced by the arts and crafts movement. It's really about how the buildings are approached. And I emphasize, I gave so little attention to this, but there is a world of Greek temples being built in the United States. There's the influence of the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the City Beautiful movement. So there's a whole lot of what's not included in what's arts and crafts, but there are ideas in the arts and crafts movement and some moral perspective about it that will serve if one thinks, well, I can do one more. What's romanticism? It's extremely diverse too. So these are ideas rather than very narrow styles. And of course, Gothic revival has gone on for very well since I'm trying to, like the Sham Castle is something I used to show students. Where is it? It's a country house building. It's not Stowe. Oh man, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, the Gothic revival starts in the late 18th century and it just keeps going. It really is. It's so many periods and versions of it. But anyway, arts and crafts, it would really has to be you really have to know who's involved and what motivates them.
Great, thank you. And Peter thanks you for your presentation, and he is ordering your book. And he asked, would you discuss Henry Mercer?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Has been like a beauty contest or something. Maybe useful and beautiful. Maybe that's what it was. Just choosing what buildings first for the book, and that really took time. And then also figuring out what to do even for this because I wanted to leave time. So it was like cut, cut, cut. So Mercer's, I've been there several times, and more than once, more than twice. And it was the question, what do, sorry, here I'm on.
Just would you discuss Henry Mercer?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So what am I saying? Mercer, interestingly, first of all, there's a book by Cleota Reed. I should know that by heart by now. That's about Mercer. It's really good and it's still relevant. Mercer, not surprisingly, did attend Harvard and then made friends there. H.H. Richardson made friends there. A lot of well-known architects start with their educational experience to start to find their clients and people who will support them. So Mercer, ultimately, he is from the Bucks County, and he goes back to the Philadelphia area, where he becomes interested first in this interest of Norton's, Charles Eliot Norton, in craft production. So he starts experimenting with tile, and then ultimately, I'll just skip a whole lot, he builds his own home there. He starts collecting the folk and just based colonial farming utensils, tools, and so he builds this whole museum to hold those. For his tile, we'll call it factory. It's a clay building with the Mercer tile embedded in it, and the point here that I maybe think is most interesting is it really was top down. So there's a lot of mythology even in this, but he does sell the tile. That part is a good solid connection. It's sold through the Society of Arts and Crafts shop in Boston, and it turns up everywhere. It turns up in Minnesota. It's all sorts of places. But Mercer is definitely open to the public. The tiles are now, in fact, I could show you on my there. There are two tiles over there that are modern reproduction Mercer tiles. And I've seen architects in my town, Winchester, use Mercer tile in arts and crafts style buildings. But it is still made in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And it's great. So, but anyway, this was a top-down organization. And Mercer handled the designs. Mercer, this is true of a lot of these societies. They just the top dogs were usually the architects, and in this case, if it were a business, and it was to some degree, they dictated design.
We've got a lot of great questions coming in. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. Casey asks, did any architects directly mention the writing of the English arts and crafts movement as an inspiration?
Yeah, but I just can't say enough about how mainly in Boston and Chicago. Oh, well, no, in California, these people were going back and forth. We're not sailing at this point. They can get steamships and they go back and forth. Langford Warren was half English. They're very much aware of these of what's going on there. They are seeing it, and many of them. Howard von Doran Shaw, I'm terrible now with the names. But Van Doran Shaw, he goes off to England, and they meet. Another thing, I do start the book with this. They bring letters of introduction. So, and there's always somebody in the world that they're in to introduce them to what was the actual architects who were in England. So they're familiar with what's being built, and we do have now, I don't know if you want to call them trade magazines, but they're subscribing to the English architects periodicals, and the English actually are starting to watch what's going on here, especially the work of H.H. Richardson. But it's one big community.
And Tracy asks, there are some design historians who do not consider Frank Lloyd Wright a member of the arts and crafts movement. What is your opinion on this?
I can feel very confident in saying he was a founding member. He was there, and it wasn't that big. You can see the list of original members. He was a founding member of the Chicago Society of Arts and Crafts. If that doesn't let him in the door, I don't know what would. But he's very involved with that, and they're meeting at Hull House, which has this major arts and crafts. I'll just call it ideas. These major arts and crafts ideas behind it.
Such a great answer. Thank you. And
We can go back and argue though.
Maria says, could Maureen comment on garden styles, re arts and crafts movement, please?
I'm not the expert. I'm just all these proper nouns and names are going. Judith Tankard, there, she's a friend too. It's, oh God, these names. But Judith Tankard has written about American arts and crafts gardens, which is one reason I decided, well, let's leave it to Judith. And I did. Sometimes it was the setting, but the gardens and what they were, I suppose you could say it would be informal. There's this, that is an arts and crafts ethos of just informality versus pretentiousness. And then you can look at the gardening that William Morris, his garden, there's just, and the love of the gardens. So I didn't go into it because I felt that there was so much with my beauty contest going on in selecting buildings that I felt I wouldn't take up the garden topic. But they are, this informality is one of the things that marks them, especially think about mid-Victorian setting out these beds of very formally, geometrically organized beds with the little rows of marigolds. I don't know.
Well, our hour has come to an end, and I feel we should let Maureen recover from entertaining us and answering all these great questions. Thank you so much, everyone who posted a question and for coming and being part of the conversation. And look out for news from all of us about upcoming events, both in person and online. And thank you again, Maureen, for a really fascinating talk.
Well, thank you, Imogen, for your work behind the scenes and reading the questions to me. That was good. And thanks to everyone who came. Thank you very much.
Thank you.